I've been on the fence about whether or not I was going to pick up a Nintendo Switch 2, and over the weekend I decided, you know what, I'm going to be an early adopter of this console, and I'm going to jump in and try to explore some of the things that this new Nintendo console has to offer. In particular, I really wanted to try Super Mario Kart World, as well as see how games like Tears of the Kingdom fared with an upgraded hardware backing that game. And so in this video, I'm going to go over kind of what you get with the Nintendo Switch package. I grabbed the one that came with the Mario Kart World, as well as kind of my first impressions and what I think of the Nintendo Switch 2 so far. So let's take a look. So to start, I want to commend Nintendo for really streamlining the packaging so it's nice and concise, if that makes sense. I remember the original Nintendo Switch box was just like this massive box for a relatively small console, so it was cool that Nintendo kind of packed everything they needed to into this small box. Now, I decided to get the package that came with Mario Kart World. Now, the reason for that is, if you really look at the cost, the games for the Switch 2 are quite expensive, and it was a lot cheaper to just buy the console with Mario Kart World than doing that separately. So I felt like, as far as bang for your buck went, this made the most sense because I was going to get that game regardless. Now, going into the packaging itself, you'll see that you get a number of different things. You get your standard HDMI wire. There's a new power port or AC adapter for the Switch 2. There's a new dock system as well for the Switch 2. And of course you have the console as well as the Joy-Cons and the attachment so you can use the Joy-Cons as a mouse and also use them to have the wrist strap support on the devices themselves. Now, getting into the actual console, the first thing I noticed, and I knew that this was going to be bigger, but this seems a lot bigger than the original Switch in a lot of ways. And that was the first thing that really stood out to me. This seems like a big handheld console, which is a good thing because I think especially with better fidelity, better graphics backing this console, it's nice to have a large screen when you are traveling. And I did use my original Switch quite a bit on plane rides, traveling, on hotel stays for work and those sorts of things. So having something this big really does make it feel a lot more premium, I guess. Now, one of the things that I do want to highlight that I've really appreciated that they've kind of changed was I really found it annoying trying to use the original Switch dock when it came to USB-based devices. So in other words, plugging in like a controller and those sorts of things really were things that kind of bothered me. It felt like you had to pull off the whole back area of the dock and then plug everything in. Now that still is the case for your HDMI and your power adapter, but there's an actual side port on this dock that you can just plug in USB based devices pretty easily, just like you would any other console. And it's a small touch. It's not a system seller, but it's a small touch that I appreciate that's been added because it's just a lot more seamless if you are a guy like me who's still using wired based controllers and those sorts of things. Now, one thing that this is just part of my initial thoughts that I wish, I still like physical media. I like physical games. So yes, it was great that I got Mario Kart World with this. It sucks that it just came as a downloadable code. Didn't really research this part that hard, but I was hoping that I would be opening it up and getting an actual physical game. But regardless, you did get the game with the download code. It just, even if I would have got a case with the code, that would have felt a little cooler and a little bit more like something tangible, I guess. But it is what it is. Now, going into the setup, the first thing I noticed was Nintendo actually has a cool system transfer feature. And I don't know if this has always been there, but it seems like they've built this from the ground up for the Switch 2 in mind. And while it's not as seamless as like an Apple device transferring from an old one to a new one, it worked pretty well. I was actually pretty happy about that. And after I got through the setup, which took me about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, after I got through that setup, it felt like everything was pretty much set up for me for my previous Nintendo Switch. And this is where I got into actually getting into the games. Now, I noticed that it seemed like, and you have to understand my whole arcade, this whole setup is in the corner of my basement basically. And this is actually pretty far from my Wi-Fi adapter. So I'm used to my old Switch kind of downloading pretty slow. It did seem like, and I don't know what changes happened here, I didn't research this, but it seemed like downloading Mario Kart World took me like probably 45 minutes. And upgrading Zelda Tears of the Kingdom seemed like it was a very quick process. The first thing I did try, however, because I've been really engrossed in it recently, was Tears of the Kingdom. And out of the gate, so I'm playing on a 4K display back here, and I tried it first on this display, and out of the gate, it was like night and day. I've played Tears of the Kingdom on different TVs, different displays, including an old 4K TV I used to have that you can see in some of the older videos on this channel. And I was really impressed, not just by the visual fidelity, but also by the fact that it's in full 60 frames. It just feels like a fresh coat of paint's been applied to an already great looking and great playing game, but it oddly just feels a lot, I don't use the word smoother, but it feels a lot more engrossing because it's so smooth with these upgrades and with the increase in resolution. And so that out of the gate was something that I was actually quite amped up for. I thought that was awesome. And getting into games like Mario Kart World also looks incredibly good. I'm not necessarily sure at the exact fidelity that it's running, but it appears to be 4K. I'm playing pretty close to the screen now, so I can usually tell if there's a resolution dip, but it looks like it runs incredibly well. Now, based off of this, however, something I want to highlight. The Switch 2 so far for me, and this is kind of my core impression of it, is it's for a particular type of gamer at this moment. And what I mean by that is, it's for a gamer who wants the best of everything when it comes to playing their games. However, that has a bit of an asterisk beside it. Here's what I mean. If you're like me and you want the best possible version of Tears of the Kingdom on a console, you can't get better than the Switch 2 at this point. If you're somebody who wants to play an ultra polished Mario Kart game and a good Mario Kart game, then, you know, this console is gonna definitely be for you. But if you're not a Mario Kart fan and you're not a Donkey Kong fan, which is another game I'm gonna be grabbing soon, I don't know what unless you're really a diehard of playing Zelda in 4K, I'm not sure who this console is going to appeal to at the moment. That's not a knock at the console, but the third-party games that are on this, yes, there's some great games like Cyberpunk. I've seen some of I haven't played it myself on the Switch 2, but I've seen some people doing playthroughs of it. Some people have been playing the Hitman game, and it runs really, really well on this device. However, if you're like me and you already own a Series X or a Series S, the appeal to jump into a Switch 2 to try to play those types of third-party games probably isn't there. So again, there's kind of a niche type of demographic who's really going to be gravitating towards the Switch 2. Now, that demographic is going to expand dramatically as we see more first-party Nintendo games make their way to this console, because here's the thing. The Switch itself is, you know, they really maximize the power. Developers, Nintendo, everybody really maximized the power of, as far as I'm concerned, hardware that wasn't meant to do what it actually did. And so with the Switch 2 basically being like 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1, maybe I'm overstating, I'm very excited to see what developers like Nintendo especially are going to take from this hardware and really bring to the table. And we're already seeing glimpses of it with Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong, but this is just the beginning stages. They haven't fully capped out this hardware, so I know we're gonna be seeing some incredible quality games. Further to that, I'm actually very excited to see more third-party games that I do like on my Xbox hit this console purely for when I'm traveling. I would love to play a Call of Duty on the road. I would love to play some of those games on this portable device. And part of my motivation for getting the Switch 2 came down to the fact that I was considering a Steam Deck, I was considering an Ally, but I decided, you know what? If I'm going to get the Nintendo Touch and the Nintendo exclusives, as well as some of these third-party games that I also have on my Xbox, this to me is a device that makes a lot of sense, because I was a guy who purchased a lot of third-party games that I had on previous consoles on my original Switch. And so At this point, the Switch 2, for me, was it a necessary purchase? Absolutely not. It's not like I was losing a whole library of games, or a lot of these games on the Switch original one were becoming obsolete, and now the only way to really get back into it was the Switch 2. But the Switch 2 is something that I'm welcoming, and I'm very excited about the future of it, but I do consider myself, in this case, for what I want out of this console, an early adopter. Now, there's a couple other things that I'm excited to try that I have not tried yet, like the GameCube emulation. However, there's still not a massive library there yet, but I am interested to try some of those games and see how they function on the Switch 2. I also do want to give the mouse function a chance. I think that's actually a fantastic idea, and I'd love to see how this can impact or really add to some of the software and games on the Switch 2. It's not something I've explored yet. I will say though, and this is where I'll end off, the Joy-Cons themselves, the controller itself, I have like the pack-in controller that came in. It's the same, it's kind of, sorry, not the same, it's very similar to the one that was on the original Switch, the slide-in brackets, or whatever you want to call this. But so far using this, I really like the way the Joy-Cons feel. I think they actually feel incredibly solid, and the buttons themselves also feel very sturdy. Now, is it like this revolutionary leap over the previous Switch? Not really, but I will argue that these Joy-Cons feel a lot smoother and a lot tighter than the original Switch, which is really good. And so far from the games I've been testing and playing, I really like the ergonomics of them, and I like overall how it feels, and I also like that they're a little bigger. Whereas the original Switch almost felt too small, this feels just perfect in either handheld or just using them in the actual cradle that comes with the Switch 2. So these are just my first impressions of the Switch 2. I've only had it for a couple days here, but I've been playing it pretty steadily, and I really like what I have so far. And in the upcoming week, I'm going to be putting together a full, more comprehensive, detailed review of this new console.